Hey, welcome back to K-12 Analytics Engineering. I am Marco Salcoser. Today we are going to be talking about Ed-Fi change queries and deletes. Now this is a mechanism that you can use to pull data from the Ed-Fi API and look at only the data that has changed or has been deleted since the last time you retrieved data from the API. So when you think about the Dagster ELT workflow that I showed in a previous video, what that is doing is it's fetching a bunch of data from a target Ed-Fi API, moving that into Google Cloud Storage to use dbt to query that from BigQuery to produce the analytics middle tier in Google BigQuery. So if you run that right now in a target Ed-Fi API, it's going to retrieve all the data from a set of endpoints like grades, students, student school associations. And then if you wait an hour and you run it again, it's going to retrieve all of the data again. But ideally what you'd want to do is you'd want to retrieve only the data that has changed, and you would want to know what data has been deleted. And that's where change queries and deletes come in. And so in a future video, I'm going to show a version of that ELT workflow that uses change queries and deletes. But first I wanted to do this one that actually walks through that functionality. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a minimal template which has no data. It's an Ed-Fi ODS that has no data in it, and we are going to interact with the Ed-Fi API to put data in Ed-Fi and query change queries and deletes to see how that changes as we put data, change data, and delete data in a target Ed-Fi API. So let's just move over to the desktop and let's just look at how all of that works. Right now I'm in a notebook. I will link this in the show's description. Specifically, it's a GitHub repo that you can clone to your machine, and you can open up these notebooks but reference your own Ed-Fi API. So let's look at the notebook though. And what we want to do is we want to actually get some data from the Ed-Fi API, because I want to show you that there's nothing in the ODS right now. So I run a few cells. This one is going to retrieve an access token. There's our access token. And then I'm going to get all schools. And what we see is retrieved 0 schools. Okay, that's great. So now we're going to jump over to the admin app. We are going to go into my ODS instance. I'm just working in this one here. And we are going to go under education organizations. We do not have any right now. We are going to go ahead and create one. So I'll just create a fake one here. We'll call it Hogwarts. I don't know the address, so we're just going to go with Wizardry Lane. I know it's in Scotland at least, but we're just going to go with the Chicago because I have no idea where it is in Scotland. So we'll go ahead and add this LEA. And we are going to create some schools. So let's just quickly create, let's see, school ID 100. This is going to be our middle school, so 7th and 8th grade. We're going to call it middle school, and we're going to put in an address. Create that school. We are going to add one more school. We're going to call that, we'll do school ID 200. This will be the high school, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. Call it high school, and we will add that. Okay, so we have one LEA, we have 2 schools. I'm going to jump back over to my applications, which has my API credentials or configuration. Okay, I'm using the district hosted sys vendor claim set, and I am attached to Hogwarts. Great. So I will cancel that and go back to my notebook. And I will run get all schools again. All right, we retrieved our 2 schools. And if I run this one, we see the first one is middle school. And this code right here, this code is using a client SDK, the Python client SDK, to interact with the Ed-Fi API. And so you'll get those files in the Swagger client folder. But if you wanted to generate your own, I've got a video on how to do that. So let's go down to get all students, run this, retrieve 0 students. Perfect. Okay. So now let's actually talk about change queries, because what's going to happen is I am going to create some students and some student school associations in the Ed-Fi ODS, and we want to see how the change query and deletes endpoints, how the data that comes back from those changes as I do those things. So let's start in this change queries notebook. So we are going to import a bunch of things, retrieve an access token again, and then we are going to run this cell. This cell is using a URL change queries /v1 2021 because I'm running the API mode in year specific mode, and so I need to put in a year there. We'll use 2021 and then available change versions. So I go ahead and run that, and this tells me that the oldest change version is 0 for the target Ed-Fi API, and the newest change version is 3155. Here's a slide to help you understand the available change versions endpoint. This is the endpoint that is going to tell you the newest change version on the Ed-Fi API. And so you hit this endpoint and it just gives you the oldest and the newest, and it gives you those version numbers. Let's jump into this post data notebook now. So I'm going to run this first cell to import some things, retrieve an access token. Then I create my student objects. I'm creating a student, Harry Potter. Go ahead and run this. And then this cell actually calls the post method on the target API to create the student. Got a status code of 201 back. That's looking good. And then I'm going to go further down and I'm going to enroll this student. So create a student school association. So school ID 200, that's the high school. There's Harry's student ID, entry date of September 1st into 9th grade, and it's Harry's primary school. So I'll go ahead and run this. All right, great. I've got a 201. So now if I go into my get data and I run this, get all students, I've got my student. Awesome. And then if I go over to my change queries and I run this, this newest change version has gone up. And so I'm getting a higher number here, which is telling me that there has been changes to my Ed-Fi ODS. And so what we're going to do now then is we are going to jump down to this cell right here. This cell calls an endpoint, Ed-Fi Student School Associations. It will pass in a minimum change version of 0, and then I want to pass in the 3158. So I'm going to pass in the 3158. And I'm going to run this get method here. And what I got back was Harry's Student School Association. So with this, what I could have done is I could have just left this off and just gotten all data, and I would have gotten Harry's. But what I want to show you is that we're going to keep this here. We're going to grab minimum change version 0, max change version 3158. We're going to keep that here. And we're going to go over to post data, and we're going to create Hermione. So let's go over to post data. I'll kind of clear this to make this a little easier to read. So we need Hermione's birth date. You may already know it's September 19th, 1979. I did not. Hermione Jean Granger. Let's keep bringing this over. Okay. We will create Hermione. Let's try to post that. Okay. We've got a 201. That's great. We're going to take her student ID, come down here. We will also enroll her in the high school. She will also start September 1st into 9th grade. So we create a student school association. Okay, so the Ed-Fi ODS has 2 student school associations, one for Harry, one for Hermione. Now, if I go over to change queries and I look at available change queries, so last time it returned a 3158, and I run that again, I see the newest change version is 3160. If I go down to this code that I ran, the one that's using the minimum change version of 0 and the maximum of 3158, and I run this, it only gave me Harry's Student School Association. And so let's imagine you're creating an API client that's retrieving data from a target Ed-Fi API, and then you're running that on a schedule to get changed data and deleted data. You would run that on, let's say, day 1. You'd run that on day 1, and it would get all student school associations, which is just one, and it's just Harry's. So you store that data in your own target system. Day 2 comes, you want to run that again. You see that the newest change version is 3160. So what your API call becomes is the minimum is 3159 because last time the max was 3158. So we need to increment that by 1. And then your max is now 3160. And when you run this on day 2, now you really have to look here, this student unique ID is Hermione's. So we are only receiving 1 student school association, even though there are 2 here. And actually, if I just chunk this or delete this and run this, now we've got this 2 right here. And we have Harry's here, and then we have Hermione's right below it. And so, but if I put in the minimum and max change version, then I only get Hermione's. So again, day 1, you run it, you get the only one that's there, Harry's. Now, the next day, a student school association gets added for Hermione, and so you run another get on the endpoint, but you are using change queries. You only want to know it's changed in the last day, so the system gives you Hermione's. Okay, so now let's look at deletes. So here I've got some code to delete a student school association by ID. So I want to go over to change queries where I grab the student school association for Hermione. I've got this ID here. I'm going to jump over. Well, before I do, let's look at what comes out of this endpoint. This cell right here has this URL, Ed-Fi Student School Associations deletes. And I am actually just going to remove this for now, and I'm going to run this. So this returns an empty list because we haven't done any deletes on the Ed-Fi API. But if I take Hermione Student School Association ID and I go over to this notebook and I put that in here and I run this cell, it deleted Hermione's Student School Association. And we know that because if I go back and I run this deletes again, I now have the ID of Hermione's Student School Association being returned. So the Ed-Fi API is telling me that there has been a delete on this endpoint, and it's giving me the ID of that record. Now that's interesting. So I ran this again here, and we don't get the record back, which makes sense. It's been deleted. I'm curious if the newest change version has changed up here from a delete. It has, yeah. So 3161, I assume if I change that to 3161, I still don't get anything. Yeah, because Hermione's is gone. And so let's look at a change now, actually. So let's create another student. We will create Ron Weasley. All right, create that student object, post that student. I get a 201. Let's get his student unique ID again. let's just say he came in 2 weeks later. Okay, to 9th grade, post that student school association. Awesome. So I've got that. And so if I go to change queries, just for fun, we'll go back up. We'll see the newest change version is now 3162. And so let's say for the minimum change version, I want to see 3161 and then 3162. I've got nothing. I already forgot it's 63. Okay, 3163. 3163. Perfect. There's Ron's Student School Association. And we see where's our begin date here, or an entry date of September 15th. Now we are going to change it. So we are going to go back to post, and we're going to say that actually we have, a modification to make, and we have an exit withdraw date now. And so we want to say that Ron actually transfers out on October 1st. Okay. So we go ahead and we post this, and we get a 200 that we have edited that record. We go back to change queries, and I don't change anything. I just keep this min and max, and let's see what happens. So we've got no data. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Okay, we're back in change queries. We're going to run this again. So 3164 is now. So the next time your job runs, 3163, 3164, and we should get Ron's record. So and this has entry date here and exit withdraw date of October 1st. Okay. And that's a look at change queries and deletes on the Ed-Fi API. If you used my Google Cloud deployment scripts, this is enabled in that configuration. The next video is going to show a new version of my Ed-Fi API ELT workflow that creates the analytics middle tier and BigQuery that uses change query and deletes. Essentially what it does is on the first run, it pulls all data, and then on subsequent runs, it only pulls the changed data and the deletes. It dumps all of that into Google Cloud Storage, and then in dbt, or through dbt, it then queries all of the JSON files from all of the runs to pull the most recent records and exclude the deletes.